Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. The Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, which was passed by the BJP-led government 2 weeks ago, and since then, there have been hundreds of thousands of Indians from all castes and religions protesting and demanding the government to repeal it. Now, security and police officials, they've come down hard on these demonstrators, using live ammunition in some cases, and others tear gas and other violent tactics to break up these crowds. 17 people have died, mostly from firearm injuries in Uttar Pradesh alone, which is a BJP-controlled state, including one 8-year-old schoolboy who was crushed in a stampede while the police tried to disperse the protesters. Now, finally, even Bollywood stars have spoken up, who've been silent so far. They've talked about the excessive tactics by the government to silence students of Jamia Millia University in Delhi last week, shaming the government for using violence to suppress the basic fundamental rights of students, here demanding the government repeal the act, and doing this while conducting peaceful protests. Hundreds of students were beaten and bloodied. Females were harassed and intimidated by police officials last week in one of these protests. Now, Indian authorities, they've got mobile internet access in places. They've imposed emergency laws. They banned assemblies. They've also put curbs on local media coverage of these protests, saying it is maligning the integrity of India. Meanwhile, the BJP government has launched an attempt, what it seems, to explain what the CAA essentially is by launching an animated video that shows two bearded men in a traditional attire, Muslim attire, talking about the legislation before concluding that the country will only move forward if there is peace, harmony, and brotherhood. This appears to be an attempt by the government to dispel any kind of misapprehensions the Indian Muslims who are protesting have about not just the CAA, but also the NRC. So we will be discussing more of what the implications are for the BJP-led government as the protests continue, the body count goes up. And what's interesting enough here, while Hong Kong has seen similar protests against its government, those in over 6 months of those protests have only seen 2 dead. But here, in the past 2 weeks, the death count has reached over 25. So without further ado, let me introduce who we'll be talking to today. We have with us Mr. Ravi Srivastav, an analyst joining us from Delhi, and also Mr. Ejaz Haider, an analyst and executive editor of Indus News, joining us here from Lahore. Welcome to both of you. Mr. Srivastav, the situation in India does not seem to be getting better, especially with this video that has resurfaced. I would like to hear your sentiments on this video. Have you taken a look at the video, animated video the government has just released yesterday?
The situation in India is extremely explosive at this moment, in the sense that lakhs and crores of youngsters, school students, have descended on the streets. They are having these torches, they are protesting, there are peaceful protests, and the bill, that CAA, is being opposed tooth and nail. One more correction I would like to make here, that it is not that only Muslims are protesting, it is all communities of India, large number of Hindus, Parsis, Christians, Sikhs, everyone is on the street. The agitations initially started from northeast, the Assam, Meghalaya, Arunachal, Manipur area, and 5 lives were lost there in those agitations. After that, it spread into Jamia Millia Islamia at Delhi, the JNU, the Delhi University, Aligarh Muslim University, and these places. There, police did ample of atrocities. They entered into the hostels, they entered into the library, they beaten up the girl students, they literally raided and did all kind of mischief over there, because police in Delhi is controlled by the Home Minister of India, Mr. Amit Shah, directly. The police does not report to the state chief minister or others, because Delhi is not considered a full-fledged state. There are certain powers which are taken over by the central government. Other than that, what you have stated is absolutely correct. The government is using its trigger-happy police to fire on those protesters. It has happened in entire state of UP. It has happened in Karnataka, in Mangaluru. There were 2 deaths there, two casualties there. They died of the police firing, and 17 innocents lost lives in UP, including an 8-year-old child. So this is the situation in India. The government machinery is trying to put up by that both the states, that Karnataka and UP are the BJP ruled states. In BJP ruled states, the free hand has been given to the police to fire on the protesters, to seize their properties. They are identifying people by the videography and the videos, and they are they're picking up people from their homes, arresting them. The UP's Congress leader Sadaf Nazar, that lady has been arrested and not given bail till now. A lot of arrests are being made, and the government is trying to do a propaganda from their side. There are full-page newspaper advertisements. They are releasing some videos, and the party functionaries are doing protest in favor of CAA in several states. But I can tell you, this whole agitation is fueled by none other than the Prime Minister of India himself, who says in a Jharkhand election rally that those who are putting up on fire, they can be recognized by their clothes. And the people, a member parliament of India named Tejasvi Surya, who comes from South Bengaluru, makes a statement that only illiterate people and those who put up the punctures in the cycles are only protesting against CAA. So this kind of statements are coming in, and they are fueling fire. And the government says that we are trying to educate people.
Right.
Now, it's very funny that you have passed an act in the parliament without educating the people of this country.
And it's coming into, and it's like you highlighted, it's pretty much hitting themselves in the foot here with their explanations, which is Mr. Ejaz Haider, bringing you into this conversation here. I mean, I, in my defense, did mention that the people out on the streets in India, they're not just Muslims here. They're from all caste, religion, from every background. In fact, these protests are not just taking place within India. They're taking place in Washington, D.C., outside the Indian embassy there, by all people from all walks of life. Apparently now even in South Africa. Your sentiments on how the BJP government is handling this, as it seems to be spinning very rapidly out of control?
Thank you, Ayza. I think a couple of things need to be made very clear upfront. One is that the BJP government was not really, they did not really appreciate the situation. They weren't expecting this kind of pushback. So their first reaction is that they have doubled down, and they have decided that they are going to somehow suppress this discontent. The second thing is that there was a German exchange student in Madras. He put up a poster which is kind of metaphor for what's happening in India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And the poster said, 1933, 1945. We have been there, don't go that way. So being a German student and the years 33 and 45, he was essentially talking about Adolf Hitler and its Nazi party and what happened to Germany because of the Nazi party. For all his pains, unfortunately, he was called in by the immigration authorities, and they said to him that he had violated his visa rules or whatever the issue was, and that he needs to, unless he wants to be deported, he needs to immediately catch a flight and go back to Germany. And apparently he has. I think he's probably flying out today because he had missed his flight from Delhi. So this is a metaphor for what's happening in India. The issue with the BJP government, if you look at how they have operated in the last 5 years also, and since they were returned with a very heavy mandate this time also, has been to say that we are going to be bold and we are going to be disruptive. And when they say disruption, they're basically saying that consecutive governments in India have been mollycoddling various interests And this government's primary interest is about the Hindu majority, and that they will not allow the minorities to dictate what the majority has to do. Now, if you look back at the history of, as I said, Nazism or fascism or other totalitarian ideologies, it's very clear that this begins by targeting the minorities. And that's the trend that we have seen in India. They did this in Kashmir. There was joyous feeling in mainland India. No one was really, apart from some voices, no one was really concerned, and still is not really concerned about what's happening there.
Right.
Then you had the Babri Masjid decision.
Yes.
There were slight, voices, mostly from the discerning Hindu intellectuals, because they have the advantage of their names and the fact that they cannot be targeted with that kind of, impunity as Muslims. And there weren't too many protests. So It seems to me from a distance, and Mr. Srivastav, who's been on my program also, has been very vocal in his opposition to these developments, which is very fortunate, because there are people like him who believe that India needs to be a secular, inclusive country. And they feel that, under the BJP, that's not what's happening.
Right.
It's very clear that they thought that, people will take this lying down, because the previous measures have not really gotten the kind of pushback that they should have had.
But it seems that this time round, they've really...
This time round, yes. And secondly, these things have happened, so in strategy, there is a term salami slicing. So you nip at things and you slice them lightly, and you space that slicing. But this government has gone in for measures one after another, bulldozing them. And it seems to me Mr. Srivastav is in a better position because he's there. It seems to me that the citizens have decided that there's been too much of this, and now
too much, and they've had enough. Mr. Srivastav, do you see it this way also, that the CAA could have been the straw that broke the camel's back?
Either CAA is only a beginning. This is a prelude to another farcical exercise, that National Register of Citizens, that is called NRC here in India. Under NRC has been being planned for quite some time, and under Supreme Court order, the government undertook that exercise in the state of Assam. As a result, what they found, to their dismay, that there were 13 lakh Hindus and there were 6 lakh Muslims only. So that became, the exercise actually fell flat on their face. They were not prepared for this kind of an outcome. And they were making detention centers there, where all those people who are not found to be the citizens of India will be kept and detained there. Not alone that, they were planning to make detention centers across the country. The place where Bombay, where I was staying, in a town called Nerul, they were planning a big, huge detention center to be made. Because NRC, our Prime Minister actually lied in a public speech. If you have heard 2 days before, he was saying that there are no detention centers in India, which is a blatant lie. There are detention centers, and some are being constructed.
He also went as far as to say that he's never pushed any policy or brought any policy, created any divisiveness in India. I mean, if we're talking about lies, we should talk about the whole spectrum of him, even alleging that he's never discriminated against Indian Muslims.
No, that's what he says. That's what he claims. But he, in fact, never, what he preaches, he never practices that. That's a problem. Because otherwise, you will not get the kind of statements which I have made, that those who are putting the things on fire are recognized by their attire. So this is a farce. But what I'm saying is, he has been telling lies on 2 counts. One was that NRC is not even being discussed in the cabinet, and the people are apprehending that that would be implemented. And the fact is, the Home Minister of India on the floor of the Parliament has already said that the subsequent exercise is going to be NRC, which will be undertaken across the nation, and the likely expenditure for doing that exercise for this, under the economy, distressed economy nation is going to cost 54,000 crores of rupees.
Yes.
And the public money will be wasted on that.
Absolutely.
So these are the things which were, the lies spoken by none other than the Prime Minister. Let me tell you, just add one small thing, that once this, after winning this election, BJP became bolder than past. Because that those 5 years, they thought that now they can proceed with whatever they wish. They did on triple talaq. They did it on Article 370. And the skewed decision on that building of Ram Mandir, which has left many people wounded for that matter, and they are trying to proceed with that. And now this CAA and NRC, the people's patience is running
out. We're seeing very interesting developments here. We're seeing students taking a stand here. For example, this happened just yesterday. A student from Kerala refused to accept a gold medal for her master's in communication. She was kicked out of her own convocation and given no reason for it because she refused the medal on the basis that she was supporting the Citizenship Amendment Act. I mean, there are a lot of developments taking place here, but Mr. Ejaz, we're running out of time, so I want to get your comments on the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, how they've come out and given this very strong worded statement that their concerns over India passing the CAA and that they might be even looking at sanctions. What are your sentiments on that? Could that just be symbolic, or could it go any further than that? Could there be possibly sanctions that India might be facing from the US?
It's a very interesting and significant statement. These statements are also coming out of various other, Western intellectual circles, and people are kind of waking up to the BJP government's style of governance. Mr. Modi was essentially eating the fruits of previous governments' reach out and India's soft power. And last time in 2014, when he rode to power, he was essentially, there were promises of smart cities, infrastructure development, cleaning the Ganges, and all of the right rhetoric that anyone wanting to win elections would, try and write. And there were, despite the pogrom in Gujarat, the general sense was that he managed development in Gujarat, and he's now, since he's become the Prime Minister, he's going to expand that to across India. But that has not happened. And the goodwill that India had generated, and I would say not just during the Congress government, but also during the government of late Mr. Vajpayee, that goodwill, given the kind of measures that this government has been taking, that goodwill has begun to erode. And people are becoming very conscious of the fact that this is, Ayza, India is a huge country. It has a population of 1.3 billion people. Yeah. It's not a small number. And this is a country that, given the diversity, linguistic diversity, ethnic diversity, tribal diversity, religious diversity, this country simply cannot be run under some kind of religious theocratic ideology.
And we're seeing the repercussions of that. I'm sorry to cut you there, Mr. Haider. We've run out of time. But seeing the kind of repercussions that is instilling in a secular India, in the world's biggest democracy, is now, it seems, imploding and coming apart from the seams there. But we have to take a short break here. Mr. Srivastav, Mr. Haider, thank you so much for joining us in talking about what CAA is doing to Indian society as the protests continue. With that, we'll take a quick short break. We'll be back with more news and analysis. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. We'll be talking about Syria now. Activists and rescue workers are calling it the biggest mass movement since September. Tens of thousands of civilians are fleeing Syria's northwestern province of Idlib as Russian-backed Syrian forces are gaining ground after renewed attacks against the last rebel-held area from what we are learning in various media reports. Now, on the northeastern part of this war-torn country, 8 people were killed in the town of Suluk in the Tel Abyad district when a vehicle rigged with explosives blew up in a market on Monday. Now, according to Turkey's defense ministry, the YPG was behind this attack. Now, at the same time, we've heard Mr. Erdogan talk about the influx of refugees from Idlib that are fleeing towards the Turkish border, talking about how Turkey is no longer equipped to handle such a huge influx. Meanwhile, the situation becomes more and more tense, and as it develops, we want to talk to our guests about what becomes of these civilians fleeing this part of town to another part of town, which is already seeing its share of the war. Now, for that, let me introduce guests who are joining us. We have with us Mr. Hadi Nasrallah joining us from Beirut as an analyst, and also Mr. Jan Hasasu, an analyst joining us from Istanbul. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with you, Mr. Nasrallah, about the situation that is unfolding in Idlib. You were there recently. You were on the ground. What was the situation on the front lines? It has already been a place, Idlib, where a lot displaced within Syria had taken refuge. With this latest attack, how many, in your idea, are now on the run once again?
Since my last visit to Idlib, I was able to visit the front lines of the province. Of course, I wasn't able to go inside since it was held by jihadists. I was able to visit some towns like Mhardi and Sklaybe around the area of Idlib and see the misery they've been going through, the suffering they've been going through because of mortar shells and missile attack each single day. And a lot of children were killed, a lot of women were killed, a lot of elderly were also killed and injured. The situation in Idlib for me is basically based on the media explaining it as it's a government against the civilians, which is not true. If you look back at history in Syria, you look back at the recent ongoing wars in Syria, most people who were evacuated from rebel-held areas towards Idlib were either jihadists or organizations that are linked to terrorist or global organizations like Al-Qaeda. Mm-hmm. So there are civilians, there are a lot of trapped civilians. I mean, there are approximately 3 million civilians inside Idlib province, but picturing the war as if it's a government just attacking civilians, it's completely false on our side.
Okay, so that's not what you're saying. It is a totally false narrative, but that's how the media is portraying this. Mr. Jan Hasasu, your comments on this, please. The way it is coming across is that, and the way it's being reported at the moment is that the Russian-backed Syrian regime is being indiscriminate in its attacks on not just civilian convoys who are trying to flee the area.
Well, actually, we have to first point that Idlib is maybe world's largest refugee camp. Mm-hmm. This area is the last area inside Syria that the opposition groups are gathering. The Syrians who really don't want to leave Syria, they are founding this place as the last hideout for them. They don't want to be a refugee in Turkey or elsewhere in Europe, but they wanted to still live inside Syria without being oppressed by the regime. So the civilian population is very high. Yes, there are groups who are controlling this area, and Turkey through Sochi is trying to solve this problem with its partners, Russia and Iran, to bring peace in this area or somehow to control the armed groups. And I may say most of these groups are not even under the umbrella of the Syrian National Army, but still Turkey wants to manage this crisis without harming the civilian population, which is a very high percentage. We're not talking about even like 4 to maybe 5% of the whole population, which is almost about 4 million in this region. Almost 4% or less could be armed, and the rest are mainly civilians. I want to give you an example. Only at the Turkish border side of Idlib, there are more than 20,000 children, orphans, taking care by the Turkish Red Crescent. Imagine how many others deep inside the Syrian territory. A lot of widow women, elders, people who can't afford to travel, or physically they're not able to travel away. So there are a lot of people with really lack of freely traveling around the area. They found shelter in this area, and this kind of attacks, regime knows that there are a lot of civilian populated areas, but unfortunately, these operations are causing a lot of harm to the civilian population as well.
Mr. Nasrallah, when we hear humanitarian organizations talk about how there are already 1 million Syrian refugees that are living near the Turkish border, they're talking about just in the past 2 days, there has been a mass exodus of over 25,000 people. And you're talking about how the civilians are not being attacked here by the Syrian regime. What is then unfolding in terms of the kind of humanitarian efforts being made to help those who are fleeing?
Well, I just want to say one thing first, adding to the other guest who said that it's the largest place holding refugees. It's also, Idlib is known for the largest safe haven for Al-Qaeda. And that's what the U.S. administration said before. So I see like the humanitarian organizations, they're worried about civilians, and which is something natural in a war zone. But framing the Syrian government and its allies like the Russians and the Iranians for the humanitarian disaster or catastrophe that's happening in Idlib is completely irrelevant to the reality of what's happening there. I mean, the rebel fractions, Al-Qaeda, which is represented with HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and the other Free Syrian Army fractions, they've been eternally fighting for years. And a lot of people have been displaced. A lot of people have been attacked, and car bombs were used in different areas in the country. So definitely civilians are going to escape the war. They're going to escape the airstrike by the Syrian government attacking the rebel positions. Civilians are in the area. They're going to escape from one area to another to avoid being killed. But the Syrian army, when they are attacking, they're not aiming at civilians. They're just aiming at the jihadist terrorists.
It makes a bit of an argument, though, Mr. Nasrallah. Mr. Janis, also would like to get your comments on this, because what we've recently seen in the UNSC, Russia and China were the ones who vetoed humanitarian aid to Syria at a time where not only they're facing a harsh winter, but also one of the worst humanitarian crises. They can't get any food aid now. They can't get any humanitarian help now. Why? Because Russia seems that it will inculcate more the problem of those extremist jihadists in the area.
Well, first of all, let me touch this issue of Idlib being housing Al-Qaeda groups. Well, Al-Qaeda's headquarters is in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is controlled by the U.S. So what? I mean, Al-Qaeda could be anywhere. Al-Qaeda related or affiliated groups could be anywhere. And the opposition itself has problem with this Al-Qaeda affiliated group. But the way that the Syrian government is dealing with the civilians, I can't say like they are targeting deliberately, but they are not caring about the civilian casualty either. I mean, we can't see any measure taken by the Syrian regime to protect the innocents' life in these areas. And in fact, we have seen reports from local media journalists giving us sound records of army communication saying there are no civilians, there are no one but your enemy, but there were a lot of civilians in these areas that they attacked during these recording were recorded actually. So I can't say that the Syrian regime is innocent and they don't have any information about what they are attacking. But when they see civilian population around their targets, they don't really care to the civilian casualty, and they're not sensitive in this sense in any meaning.
Will this recent meeting on Monday with the Turkish officials having met, the delegation met with their counterparts in Russia, what will, in your opinion, it result in? Is there going to be a ceasefire soon? Is there going to be some agreement with Russia on terms of the kind of attack that is taking place in Idlib and causing this influx of refugees to most likely pour over into Turkey that President Erdogan says he cannot afford to have?
We've been seeing this since Geneva talks. Whenever there is a talk on the table, the army or the armed forces on the ground are starting an offensive to just prove their place on the table, So this meeting is going to be very important, not for the developments in Syria, but some other developments on the Mediterranean Sea as well between Turkey and Russia. But Turkey, as I said, since the Sochi sitting started, wanted to solve this problem in another way, because this Al-Qaeda thing is not going to solve the problem. There are a lot of people living in these areas, and Turkey from the beginning is trying to say, yes, Al-Qaeda is maybe a problem for all of us, for the Syrian opposition, for the Syrian regime. Maybe the opposition and the regime is agreeing on one thing for the first time in this area. But destroying Al-Qaeda doesn't mean you just can ignore the civilian disaster that is happening there. And Turkey is trying to put its all power until the last effort to solve it peacefully without letting another wave of immigrants or another disaster for the people who already experienced this several times inside Syria.
Okay, and Mr. Nasrallah, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he's already called and warned for an immediate end to these hostilities. Otherwise, he warns that this will be one of the greatest humanitarian crises in recent history. If these refugees aren't given access to cross the border into Turkey, which clearly is not going to happen, what is going to be their future? What kind of a response coordination is taking place by the Syrian regime itself to help these at this time of the year?
So basically, the Syrian government now, before every attack, before any military assault towards an Al-Qaeda-held area, they send warnings and they tell civilians that they are welcome in the government-held regions anytime they want. Unfortunately, they are held as captives by some terrorists, and they can't do that. And looking at the latest, one of the most essential liberation processes in Syria, the Ghouta battle, you can see that civilians were trapped and they were surrounded. They had no choice but to go to government-held areas. More than 70% of the civilians chose to stay in the government-held regions, while 30%, which is the militants and their families, went to Idlib. So now in Idlib, unfortunately, that's not the case now, because they either have Turkey or to come to the Syrian government areas. So what they're doing now is they're moving towards the north. They're staying in Idlib city. They're staying either in hospitals or mosques, or they're going to the refugee camps bordering Turkey in the north. So their choice now is either to stay there until the liberation of the south is done and they can come back to their hometowns, or to go to Turkey, which is a slight chance that's going to happen.
And there is a slim chance indeed of that happening. Mr. Nasrallah and Mr. Hasasu, thank you so much for joining this conversation about what is unfolding in Syria and especially what will be the future of those fleeing Idlib at the moment. And with this, we'll take a quick short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Now we'll be taking a look at our third story. Now, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, she announced her intention to launch an investigation into alleged war crimes committed in the Palestinian territories. And she made this announcement last week, saying that she had now sufficient evidence to investigate the alleged Israeli and Palestinian war crimes committed in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. Now, the result of this could possibly lead to, many years from now, that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the current defense minister, the army chiefs could possibly find themselves in the dock in The Hague and be facing charges of war crimes. However, let's not forget here that the chief prosecutor also said that she would investigate the Palestinian side of being complicit in war crimes by the Hamas, she mentioned in her detailed report. Now, Palestinians are hailing the statement, the announcement as a victory. And they're saying that this will be the beginning of taking into account what has been rightfully theirs and been taken away from them by Israel. But Israel's reaction is calling it basically outrageous and illegal under international law. In fact, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called it pure anti-Semitism. The Palestinians While welcome this decision and the kind of reaction we are seeing from Israel, we're trying to investigate here, analyze whether this could be a possible opportunity for both sides to come to the table to have a conversation at a panel which could be seen as impartial. But the claims being contested here is that ICC has no jurisdiction and it doesn't really apply. So to better understand this, we've welcomed an attorney, Mr. Bar-Yoshafat, who is joining us today from Jerusalem. Welcome to Newswire. Mr. Ran, how did you first react to the announcement? What's your opinion on whether ICC has any jurisdiction or not on investigating whether there were any war crimes?
The ICC does not have jurisdiction, but actually what Bensouda has done was very smart. She said she's not going to investigate herself. She appointed 3 judges, the same judges who are involving the IV Marmara. So they're going to be the people who are trying to decide what's happening here. You have to keep in mind that this is not something new. It actually began 5 years ago. I'm not concerned about the fact that the ICC is doing this. I just think it makes the ICC more of a farce, because the ICC is supposed to be a legal platform and it became a political platform. And when you feel like you already know the outcome of a trial, you wouldn't want to go on that trial. The question is not if they have the jurisdiction. They don't. The thing is that if they will produce materials that will vilify Israel, then that's going to stick into the international discourse.
Right. So when it comes to that ICC doesn't have a jurisdiction, but at the same time, the argument that we've seen from various experts on this is that while the signatories to the Roman Statute, Palestine was one of them, hence it does give them the right to get into this area. I mean, is that an argument that will stand at a time where Israel could really benefit from this opportunity in coming out and speaking at a forum that there are many signatories to?
No, and I'll tell you why I think that the answer would be no. First of all, again, the question of jurisdiction is a very simple legal question, but it became political. And what do I mean by that? You have so many resolutions in the Human Rights Committee that basically are against Israel. There aren't any decisions against Hamas. Now, I'm going to put the PA aside for a second. There aren't any decisions against Hamas. How is that? Because it became something political. It's a political tool. When you see that terrorist organizations such as Hamas and such as World Jihad, they're so rejoiced when they hear about the ICC decision to make this investigation. You know, that's the time to be very, very cautious to say, is this really a legal question or is this a political question? So I don't think that they have anything to worry, because I think the outcome is already known. Basically, Israel is being accused of 2 things. One, there's a question is, have the IDF committed any crimes? And the second is, why are Jews living in Judea? And you know, here in Israel, we're celebrating the holiday of Hanukkah, where Jews received liberation from the Greeks 2,000 years ago. The fact that people say, is it a war crime for a Jew to live in Judea? We're called Jews because we come from Judea. I think it pretty much sums the question of, is it a fair trial or not?
Well, the argument that why is that this is a politically motivated attempt and why is Israel being targeted? To be very fair, the statement clearly said when it was issued on Friday, it was a 112-page report. It categorically said that by the war crimes committed by both the Israel Defense Forces and Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. It didn't just target the IDF.
100%. Yet again, because the Hamas were so rejoiced when they heard that, I again feel like we know the outcome of the result. And it's a very, very long paper which says basically nothing about Hamas. Yet it uses so many NGOs, non-governmental organizations, who received money from Europe in Israel to try to give information only about the Israeli Defense Forces. So the fact that they've mentioned Hamas could have been nice if I felt like they were going to do something about it. But the truth of the matter is this. Israel is a democracy. When you have democracies, usually the government makes sure that it criticizes the army itself. So if we have a soldier that has a misconduct, that soldier will go into jail. Hamas does the exact opposite. The fact that there's an equivalence
you might have a process, but those investigations have never led to any convictions. Nobody's ever been jailed as a result of that. But very quickly, we're running out of time here. There's a pretrial process. There are 120 days where this pretrial process will take place. Like you mentioned, 3 judges will be sitting through that to decide whether this goes forward or not. But while the Palestinian side has very clearly said that they will participate, the Israeli side hasn't yet announced that they will partake or participate in the pretrial process. They haven't yet announced. What is your expectation? Will they be sending a team to explain their side of the story at this point?
Oh, I can surely hope not. I wish that the Israeli government will say, because of the decision of the ICC, we are withholding everything from any connection to the ICC. I think Israel should not cooperate with this because this is a farce. It's a kangaroo trial. The fact that the ICC is, again, equivocating the Hamas actions and the IDF actions, that's already a really, really poor starting point. And I really hope that my government will say, if that's the way you play, then we're not going to take part of it at all.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Bar-Yoshafat, for joining us. There's attorney and activist joining us from Jerusalem, shedding some light on why Israel continues to resist in this preliminary investigation as it's underway. But let's add another conversation, another voice to this conversation. We have with us Dr. Ghazi Hamad, an analyst joining us from Gaza at the moment. The ICC's chief, Dr. Hamad, the ICC's chief prosecutor, Ms. Bensouda, when she came out and said this preliminary examination of alleged war crimes, something that had opened up back in 2015 after the Palestinians had petitioned the ICC to take this case. What is your reaction to the latest?
This is an historical decision taken by ICC because we were waiting for this decision for a long time. Since 20 years, we are waiting that ICC take an action, a decision against Israel, aggression against our people, including different crimes. First of all, the settlements. The settlements against the international law, and all the world said that the settlements in the West Bank are illegal. Second thing is the aggression against Gaza when they killed more than 30,000 Palestinians along the last 10 years. So I think the crimes are very clear. And the international community, they receive many reports, right, even from independent organizations, from human rights organizations. So we think this is a very, very important decision. But we hope that ICC continue in order to start the investigation, because I think Israel will take an action against this decision. They try to put obstacles in front of this this movement. They try to stop it. So I think it is very, very good, important.
But Dr. Hamad, when Ms. Bensouda came out with this statement, with this report that said that this investigation would now take place, now, of course, there are 120 days for the preliminary investigation to go forward. She also said that Palestinian armed groups as well as Hamas will be investigated for alleged war crimes. She talks about in her report how they intentionally attacked Israeli civilians. She talks about how Palestinian civilians were used as human shields.
Well, there is a big difference. I think we are under the occupation. We are fighting against the occupation, against Israel occupation forces. We are fighting for our freedom, and I think if you look to the numbers of the victims who are there, you will not find any kind of comparison between the both sides. So we have many people were killed, were injured, were arrested. Right. But if you look to the other side, nothing. So I think that the comparison between both sides is unfair. And I think Hamas and other Palestinian factions are fighting against or defending themselves against the Israeli aggression. And we try to protect our people. So it is totally different.
No, the numbers you're talking about are huge. There's a huge difference because the investigation looked into the 2014 Operation Protective Edge by the IDF, this 50-day operation where over 2,000 Palestinians were killed. Most of these were civilians, and only 75 Israelis were killed, and the majority of these were IDF soldiers. In fact, if I'm not wrong, all of them were IDF soldiers. Now, the concern here is of the jurisdiction. The ICC might just not have jurisdiction to bring this case into effect because Israel is not a signatory to this Roman statute.
We think Israel will not cooperate. It's not the first time. You know that there was an international organization by this man from South Africa. I don't remember his name, but he was coming to the Palestinian territories, and he came to Gaza, and we met him in order to start an international organization. Israel refused to cooperate with him. I think Israel will try to make more pressure. You know, Israel depend on the United States in order to help them. In some countries, they don't want Israel to be charged.
But so do you not have but don't you have concerns over not just the issue of jurisdiction of the ICC, but also considering the ICC prosecutor refused to press charges over a deadly Israeli raid on a flotilla back in 2010. And this just happened earlier this month. She refused to press charges when it was clearly a violation on so many grounds of on humanitarian rights, while that flotilla was trying to actually break through a blockade that was imposed on Gaza.
Look, I think the crimes of Israel in Palestine against Palestinian people does not need any proof. You can see it every day, everywhere. You can the settlements. You can hear thousands of stories everywhere. You have many homes were demolished, where there were hundreds of families were deleted. So I think that, as I said, we have special reports, independent reports from international organization, human rights organization. I think everything is clear, but because the world is full of hypocrisy, right. They think Israel is above the law. No one have the courage in order to punish Israel, to account Israel, to stop Israel. So I think now it is dealt as a political issue, not as a legal issue. So now I think this historical decision, now he correct the compass, correct the track, that now.
So it is a historical decision, it's a victory for the Palestinians to finally get a world forum to see and address the issue that has been going on for decades too long. Dr. Ghazi Hamad joining us there as an analyst. Thank you so much for giving your time. Unfortunately, we've run out of time here. We've got to say goodbye, but we'll see you tomorrow with more news happening from around the world and analysis coming your way. Till then, goodbye.